Okay, it's 1 p.m. Hi, guys. Hello. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. So for today's lecture, it's about third world duplication, archiving Filipino Ephemera. Ephemera? Lots of ways to pronounce it. But Rice here is going to pass one copy per group here, just so you guys can pass it, and then just to see it yourself, and then you guys can just return it to the table. But it's so nice to meet you guys. Thank you so much for coming. So thank you so much for being here. One thing I do want to talk about is hello, we are Kittybug Press. We are presenting this lecture. We are a New York micro press. We mainly publish, archive, and feature queer and or female artists who are Filipino from around the world. And I think it's really interesting. So I know that in our small publishing community, we all know what a Rizo artwork is. Can anyone raise their hands if they have a Rizo artwork or a Rizo print already or know what it is? Okay, thank you. Yeah, we all know, and it's super beautiful. It's really bright. I feel like we all know those artworks. But what's really interesting is that the risograph is actually an office machine. And so when we have those Rizo artworks, it's actually an artist appropriating an office machine that's typically not used for that. And to really ground this lecture, I think it's important to know how the risograph works. And so the risograph machine is kind of a hybrid of screen printing and digital printing, because basically you can send in any image and the machine itself automatically creates the stencil and then pushes that ink on the paper. So it's very much similar to screen printing, but more automatic. It's kind of a hybrid situation of analog and digital. And what's really interesting about the Philippines is that they love Rizo. As you can see, Rizo printing can be used for office forms, school modules, paper flyers, everything. And that's 120 pesos. 120 pesos is around less than $2 for a ream, which is 500 pages, which is kind of crazy. And as you can see here, we have an abundance of Rizo ads. You can see and order any amount of Rizo reams at any point on any Facebook, any of the large major marketplaces online in the Philippines. And I think it's really because Rizo is so affordable, it's efficient, and it's very fast to make. And I think it's really interesting too, because some people say that print is dead, but somehow Rizo printing is so relied on in the Philippines. So I think it's really important for us to talk about the significance of print, because that really talks about why the Philippines uses Rizo a lot. So I'm gonna hand it to Rice here, is gonna give you kind of just a summary of Philippine history and press.
Hi guys, I'm Rice. I'm gonna give a crash course basically on Philippine history in relation to print. And it's because print significance really comes from the Philippines' rich print culture and history of small publishing. So here are just some examples of publications that were made throughout generations, starting from the very first, the white one on the right, my right, very first newspaper that was established under Spanish colonial rule, all the way to revolutionary and resistance-based papers during martial law in the 70s and 80s. But basically, I chose these pictures because throughout history, what all of these have in common is that they use print as a form of resistance. So here's a little timeline and basically a summary of Philippine history. The formation and evolution of the Philippine press system is deeply entwined with the nation's history. As previously stated, starting from Spanish colonization, the revolution, then American colonizations. So many colonizers, as you can see. Our history is very fraught with violence and subjugation. our short-lived independence, and then again, martial law, unfortunately, in the 70s and 80s up until the present. So I just really wanted to share this quote because it summarizes print history and our history really well. When one speaks of the Philippine press, he speaks of an institution which began in the 17th century, but really did not take root until the 19th century. It is a press which has bred nearly all of the country's heroes while also breeding many corrupt and unscrupulous newspapermen. Next slide, please. So let's get started with publishing under Spanish colonial rule. I wanted to share this newspaper called La Solidaridad, which was written by Filipino ilustrados, basically Filipinos who were Spanish educated. And the revolution against Spain really energized the native press. And these writers of this newspaper were influenced by liberal European ideas, and they advocated for reforms such as representation, equality, press freedom, which led to the propaganda movement. The picture over here actually is credited as like the first cartoon ever made, which was drawn by our in the Philippines, which was made by our national hero Jose Rizal. It's called The Monkey and the Tortoise, and it's sort of a caricature propaganda against the Spanish. Another thing that we wanted to highlight was how printmakers in the Philippines unionized. No picture here, just wanted to share this quote. In 1872, printers gremio staged a strike against an abusive Spanish foreman. In 1893, printers in Manila struck over ill treatment of a colleague. 6 years later, it happened again. So I just really wanted to highlight that members of printers' guilds staged the first recorded mass working class action in the region to protest abuse by Spanish foremen, and they wanted to demand better working conditions and higher wages. This eventually led to them joining the Katipunan, which is another resistance group. So La Liga Filipina was established by, again, Jose Rizal. It was separatist this time, not reformist, and they really advocated for an armed struggle because the propaganda movement failed. And this group really used print and coded text to mobilize their members against the Spanish. Another newspaper I wanted to highlight was La Independencia. It was the most prominent revolutionary newspaper during the Philippine Revolution against Spain and the Philippine-American War. It really served as a mouthpiece for Filipino nationalism, and it provided war updates, it spreaded revolutionary ideas, and overall boosted morale of Filipinos around the country to mobilize against the Americans. And lastly, trade unions in the Philippines were really important, especially Hermenegildo Cruz, who was a writer and prominent trade union organizer. And he used print to advance workers' rights and contribute to the growth of union movements in the Philippines. Moving on to our next colonizer, the Americans. So press really expanded rapidly under American rule, but it operated under strict military censorship and legal restrictions, such as sedition laws. Americans really wanted to foster a favorable view of themselves, which they called benevolent assimilation, and they used publications to depict Filipinos as like uncivilized, which is the colonial gaze as stated there. And Filipino writers during this time really criticized American colonial rule, and they advocated for sovereignty through newspapers like El Renacimiento. I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of colonial propaganda. The first two pictures are like Spanish and American racist cartoons, and they depicted taming the savage Filipinos and labeling the Katipunan as like taking advantage of the Filipinos due to their want for independence. The last two pictures over there are Japanese versus like U.S. American propaganda in hopes to recruit Filipinos during World War II. So publishing under the Commonwealth really modernized the scene, and Philippine journalism became increasingly modern and American influenced. The literary, opinion-driven, and politically reactive style of writing shifted into something more business-oriented. And the newspaper shifted to more competitive media enterprises. So as you can see, the Manila Times, which was established like during this time, evolved into like a bigger publication, which still operates to this day. And post-war press, Filipinos really experienced an unprecedented level of freedom and influence, but it was somehow complicated by political pressures like the Cold War, and of course lingering US influence over media narratives. So there was less censorship on newspapers, but they also came under private ownership, meaning wealthy, business families started to own these newspapers and established media monopolies, and led to the declining influence of, more provincial, smaller dissenting papers. So let's skip ahead to the 70s and 80s, publishing under martial law. So if you guys didn't know, we had a very infamous dictator named Ferdinand Marcos, and he placed all media under state control through decrees and regulatory bodies. He enforced censorship, banned criticism, limited reporting, criminalized dissent, had journalists killed, and during this time, only crony-owned newspapers and broadcast networks were allowed to operate. As a result, underground and alternative publications that resisted censorship and fueled opposition to the regime emerged, which we called the mosquito press. So here's some examples of publications or like printed matter that emerged during this time, such as like small protest newspapers like We Forum front pages, photocopied or mimeographed underground press sheets, hand-to-hand distributed leaflets, which we called Xerox journalism, and the middle picture here depicts a press freedom protest rally in the early 1980s. So publishing after Marcos marked the return of democracy, and efforts to professionalize journalism through ethics codes, training institutions, and press organizations really emerged here. And press regained constitutional protection and freedom of expression. But issues like, extrajudicial killings and censorship are still things that we deal with under former President Duterte and the current Marcos administration. So sadly, the dictator's son is now our president. And at the end of this presentation, we do have an interview with Micah over here, who is a former activist regarding present-day issues about, press freedom. So I wanted to talk about more underground publication after we saw how, press evolved from small-scale publications to bigger media conglomerates with significant influence. And it's really important to note that underground publication never really went away. And despite increased efforts to prevent another martial law, especially in the realm of press, the Philippines still experiences its fair share of societal issues and problems due to, mistreatment by the government and other issues. And modern-day Filipinos are really keeping the spirit of underground press alive, partly in opposition to, current issues, as stated before. And so I really wanted to highlight how zines are especially effective carriers of sometimes dangerous ideas. And they're really prevalent and important due to cheapness of labor and production costs and portability. they are very effective tools for organizing, people together behind a common goal. And I think a lot of us are familiar with how zine culture started in the UK, and it's really easy to understand how Filipinos took to this culture and adapted based on our history of colonization and, opposition/rebellion through independent publishing. And speaking of zines, I'm going to hand the mic over to Anna again to talk about the Filipino Risograph Duplicate zine and Rizzo's significance in the Philippines.
Hi guys. So yeah, I think there are 2 copies circling around. I know some people just came in, but there are 2 copies circling around for you to read. You can just bring it to the, if it ever reaches at the end, you guys can just bring it back to the table. But I think a second question that I think we're all thinking of as we think about Filipino risograph is, why is Rizzo used so much by Filipinos today versus digital printing? I know digital printing is so common here. Obviously, you can just go to USPS and all, but why is the Global South and the Philippines so attracted to this? As you can see here, we're using it for packaging and biofertilizer packaging. We're using it for flyers and all of that. And I really think, again, what I said at the start, the Philippines relies on Rizzo print because it's fast, it's efficient, it's really cheap. You can get a whole ream for $2. It's really not that bad. And I think through our Filipino Risograph archive and interviews, we're gonna dive deeper into how Rizzo had such a deep influence in Filipino culture and religion and politics. So a lot of the research here actually is very interesting. We did some interviews with print shops. We also scoured Facebook groups, which is kind of crazy. There's a lot of Facebook groups dedicated of Filipino Rizzo technicians and all of that. And so we had some talks with them, and we also had some samples dedicated. So I think I just wanted to show some of the posts that I have here to show you how much Filipinos love Rizzo. One is these 2 screenshots show a Rizzo ink delivery during a typhoon and a flood, which is kind of crazy. That is how much they love it. According to Rizzo Printing Service, Rizzo ink's delivery during Dante's Wrath is pretty funny, but also kind of sad in a way. And it really shows how reliant we are on Rizzo ink and Rizzo printing. Another one is a Facebook post shared by Sonny Velasco in Printing Hub Facebook group. He talks about printing 1,300 reams of paper just for the National Department of Education for their national exam. So that's for 650,000 papers at one go, which is pretty crazy. And then there's also just a screenshot of a supplier and the amount of Rizzo masters that they use. So I also think something we have to talk about is also the limitations we have in the Philippines. And a really clear limitation because of the environment, because of flooding, because of all of that is internet speed. Not everyone has accessibility to the internet. At most, we do have Facebook because they have paid for free apps and stuff like that, but not everyone is able to have really fast internet speed. We have one of the lowest internet speeds in the world. And because of that, it makes print really important to our culture. And also, Rizzo creates lower prices for ink versus HP or any of that. Even people here, obviously, I think we all know this, if you have a printer, some of the ink is really expensive, and Filipinos can't afford that. So Rizzo ink ends up being a really great way to spread information really fast. And so you can see here we're using Rizzo for receipts, we're using it for flyers, we're using it also for exams. It's a perfect way to really print something that you want or anything necessary. So this is actually a quote from one of the interviews we had with one of the most beloved print shops. They're called Blessings. They're based in University of the Philippines. So this is Kuya Elmer. He didn't want to show his face, unfortunately. But by the way, if you don't know what Kuya means, it means older brother. But according to him, people use Rizzo since it is practically the same as printing normally, but 30% cheaper. And that 30% is actually really important to any business owner, to any clientele, to any student, because they're really printing stuff that's really important for them. So we're gonna head to another quote he's talking about, where he goes into what kind of stuff he prints for different clients. So he talks about rallies, election flyers, schools that print ebooks and modules are our main customers for Rizzo. And I think this is really important to talk about because that's how influential Rizzo is. That's how necessary Rizzo is, because for protests, they need all these flyers. For schools, this is how they are basically duplicating ebooks for educational accessibility. This is how they give their exams. This is how even politicians spread their word about who to elect, sample ballots, and all of it. And then this picture is also Kuya Elmer and other staff working in Blessings. So what we're gonna talk about also is this deep dive of these different photos that I was able to take for our archive. So yes, Rizzo is used by different clientele, like I just talked about. And one of the things that I wanna highlight is churches and schools. So for this slide, some of you might not know Tagalog, but basically this is a religious recruitment brochure. They say that it's literally a person going away from God, and in the middle is like hell. And basically what it says is like, when you die, you get judged, and if you are going away from God, you will endlessly suffer in the flames of hell. So that's what it says. It's in Kelly Green, which is really funny that they picked Kelly Green. Another one is a fundraising concert to help Catholic school for nuns. So you can see kind of, I hope it's big enough, but you can see that there's like a nun in a plate and stuff because they're eating. They have some music notes and all of that, which is really like whimsical and nice. So that's partially like churches and schools and all of that. The other photo I have is like what we talked about on the 1300 reams, which is just like the amount of stuff that they're like printing for these schools. And just like what Kuya Elmer said, they're printing these also for ebooks and stuff like that, because obviously when a teacher is purchasing an ebook, that's like maybe $100, right? That is about half of a monthly salary for someone who's entry level in the Philippines. And so how are you gonna show this to your kids? You can't even like afford like half of that on an entry level salary for a teacher. So that's how they're able to like reproduce these books for educational accessibility. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, really funny, Star Wash, washing services. I think Filipino culture loves puns, and we gotta put that in. So this is a flyer for Star Wash services. It's mobile auto cleaning, so car washes and all of that. Another really interesting pull we were able to get was also an overseas Filipino worker agency for domestic helpers. Basically, Rizzo was being used to show like flyers on the benefits of working abroad. And I think that's really something important to talk about on Filipino culture, immigration, and obviously the diaspora. Some of it, as you can see, is like transportation allowance, food allowance, accommodation, medical examination, things that most jobs wouldn't be able to give if they're entry level or they're domestic helpers in the Philippines, which makes it really attractive. We also have some coupons, and we also have receipts from small businesses. So actually, the peak season for Rizzo is not all of that. It's actually elections. And I think that's something really important to talk about, because Rizzo is so deeply ingrained in our election cycle. It is one of the top times where print shops are literally advertising themselves. It's also the time when like people are really like are really like going to print shops and ordering like reams and reams and reams of paper, because literally that's how you get the vote, right? You can't use internet, you can mostly use Facebook, but maybe people aren't on it, and so if you want to go to every class of kind of person, you have to use Rizzo. And so you can see here we have sample ballots on that first one. There's a sample ballot of what you're supposed to do, what kind of party you have to have. These two election flyers, one is for a local election. The other one is actually a bigger one. It has Secretary Mar Rojas. He was like a VP candidate at some point. What are the grants to like document our own work or very everyday documents. Another one is from Philippine Labor Movement Archive. So what they say is, through archival materials, the PLMA highlights the valuable role of workers and unionists in creating history. So the Philippine Labor Movement Archive is a community archive. And what I find really interesting about them is that they really highlight how you know, with how the government is and an erasure of different people and different histories in the Philippines. We're able to take that role of curation ourselves through community. We're able to highlight workers, we're able to highlight unionists, and we're able to talk about anti-fascism, anti-feudalism, anti-imperialist movements in the Philippines, because those are usually undocumented. And through that, it's really powerful on what we get to say. We also have a quote here. It's, "Archiving is important to me because it is also a form of remembering. The work I did with Sachet Archives was a sentimental tribute to my own reality." So this is Gino. He is the founder of Sachet Archives. He basically archives all of these like small everyday things. As you can see, like a Coca-Cola ad on a mural, which is really funny, like it's just abandoned. Sometimes like painted posters in Visayas, some mathematic books, everyday packaging, things that are usually overlooked. I also want to talk about the full quote, because he doesn't just stop there. He talks about how basically he stopped archiving. Right, we were just talking about why is archiving important, but we also have to talk about why people stop archiving. He also said that now that his archive is being fed to AI and stuff like that, he feels like all of this stuff that he's so sentimental about is becoming slop and AI generated. And it also affects him because a lot of his work actually gets affected by floods, because we're affected by all of that in the Philippines. A lot of environmental and natural disasters happen, and so a lot of artists lose their work, literally from floods. And so he's feeling conflicted on archiving because, you know, it powers the machine. So I think when we're talking about all of this, I think it's really important to talk to the person themselves who actually did it. So I want to actually introduce, this is Micah Rimando. She was a former student media activist. She's also the Tagalog editor of the Filipino Risograph Duplicate Archive. So, hello, Micah.
Hi, everyone.
So I would love to ask you what your background is, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm a designer currently based in the US. I work for a nonprofit in advocating for women in healthcare. My focus is in advocacy-driven design. It is a path that was paved by my life in the Philippines. I didn't just witness it, I experienced it, poverty, and it is like through this lived experience that I became the editor-in-chief of Matanglawin Ateneo. It is through this that I got involved with communities, covered these stories of marginalized sectors, and unlike mainstream news, our work was dedicated to advocacy and socio-political issues. And this is where I learned that design, it's not just about aesthetics, but about survival, and collective memory.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like with your work also, if you could also explain what Matanglawan is from Ateneo so that everyone in the room knows about it and your work.
Yeah, so Matanglawin Ateneo, it's a Tagalog Filipino magazine. We also do live coverages online. Matanglawin means hawk's eye. Mata means eye, and lawin is hawk. And basically, we want to focus our eyes on the stories that are often left by mainstream media.
That makes sense. It's like a really, I feel like, just so everyone knows, it's a very historical journal. They've done a lot of like since martial law. And then one thing I do want to ask you is, I think it's important to know like how did you first like come up or like see Rizzo duplication in the kind of medium that you see that you're now using it in?
Well, I saw it being used in rallies and protests um, within and beyond campus, where student journalists would protest because of media crackdown during that time in 2017, 2018. Rappler was shut down. It's one of our main news platforms. And yeah, everyone just had to walk out of the classrooms because what is the point of us studying, talking about history when all that all that information is being buried alive, and all our history is being revised, right? It was also a time when the late dictator that Rice talked about, Ferdinand Marcos, was buried in Libingan ng mga Bayani, which means the national burial site of heroes in the Philippines. And we are trying to not just remember that time and archive it, but also fight the current historical revisionism. They were trying to talk about martial law like it's the golden era,
Exactly.
and that it's, you know, it's one of the most abundant times. But in the current time that we have in the Philippines, it's being edited in textbooks.
Yeah.
It's being told across social media by troll farms
Mm-hmm.
who the president himself that time, President Rodrigo Duterte, have mobilized to cover up fake news, to cover up like our history with fake news.
Yeah, I feel like that makes sense. Just for context, me and Micah actually like were in that during college, during that experience. So it really is something that's like near to our hearts in that sense of press freedom and going through that event.
Yeah, and mobilizing students during that time, we have to immediately, quickly act. It just all happened so fast. So we have to release statements like as part of the College Editors Guild of the Philippines. We have to stand in solidarity with the press. We have to call out those repression, and so we have to print them in Riso very quickly and very efficiently.
Yeah, exactly. So good transition. So like what I also wanted to talk about obviously is kind of like your projects that you've used Rizzo, duplication and stuff like that. And also kind of like what are things that you feel like is obviously, as you said, you are designing for survival, and like how are you applying that to your work from this time?
During that time, we had this martial law museum archiving site. It is also an organization in our university, Ateneo de Manila University, where we not only commemorated the martial law eras because it was the 45th anniversary in 2017, but we also talked about like the martial laws that happened throughout the years in 1970s, 80s, and which happened also that same year, 2018, where martial law was declared in Mindanao, and it is being used to silence media, to silence communities. It's being used to justify military attacks on our communities. So we wanted to amplify that, and RISO was used to duplicate, to reproduce all these archived news news articles from the 70s. We had to pull that back and distribute that across the campus.
Yeah, I can see that. Could you point out to everyone where where it is? It's the one on the top my right. I think it's like really interesting too. I feel like these are really, I guess, like palpable ways of showing what martial law was like and how it's kind of reliving again with censorship and all of that, especially.
Yeah. So it is really for survival. It's in the design circle, we romanticize it as analog aesthetic or for the tactile feeling. But in all honesty, like it is really how we could spread the message as fast and as efficient as possible. We don't even have smartphones like a lot of us back then, especially in the communities, and we don't also have all like access to social media. The internet in the Philippines is really bad. So the communities that we interviewed, we talked to, it is really through print paper that we pass on these messages.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's like a much more accessible medium versus like, it doesn't require anyone to have a smartphone. It doesn't require anyone to have data. It doesn't require anyone to have the internet.
I think it's really interesting how kind of history repeats itself. This is exactly how the Katipunan like mobilized and spread their word and tried to recruit more members when the propaganda movement failed. It's very telling on like the power of print and duplication and like mass duplication and the spreading of information.
Yeah, exactly. So we're actually gonna go and say last one question for you, Micah. I know that, as I said at the start, people say that print is dead. So, but I'm wondering from your end, like what you see, how print is still relevant, especially with your work and all of that.
Well, in the Philippines, we have to keep keep retelling the stories over and over, and with the troll farms, with the fake news always being spread across, it's just so easy for them to take down a post, to delete it and get lost in the algorithm. But a paper, we cannot click a report button on it, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, and it is just like how we do the work on the ground. We pass it hand to hand, the papers, and yeah, we just really need to have it, and like eventually we have to keep using it.
Yeah, I feel like exactly what you said. It's like, I think we talked about this a lot, even in the history, where, major families, like, they buy most of the press and stuff like that in the Philippines, and the only thing that we have really as a community is kind of, journalists also, and also our own, like, archiving our own community and spreading our ideas despite all of that censorship, despite all of the violent threats to journalism, despite all of these systematic problems.
Really speaks to how powerful like an underground network is in times like these. They're really, really effective in, you know, spreading information through print.
Yes, and like the whole like you can rent an ebook, but you will always have that zine. So that's just something to talk about. We're actually going to open this up to audience question and answer if you guys have any questions for any three of us. Rice is going to be moderating this. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
And yeah. Oh, wait.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, awesome presentation, so thank you guys for that. Yeah, I'm really curious to know, like, are there any specific limitations about the prevalence of RISO in the Philippines? Like, what are some potential drawbacks of being kind of railroaded into using RISO as opposed to digital print, if there are any? I'm curious.
I think like something that we don't talk about a lot, or maybe other people have talked about, but very minimally, is that there is a difference between printing risograph for artwork and printing risograph for just everyday stuff. It's really cheap to print everyday stuff in the Philippines, but for artists themselves, it is not cheap to print riso as artwork. You are needing like how many inks, that literally printing an edition run. I know here like it's so common, right? Like every other booth has riso, but in the Philippines it actually is like a whole month's salary. There's so much limitation to that. So that's kind of some of the drawbacks too with riso, is that it's not really experimented on. It's very everyday.
Yeah, I think Anna stated that artists kind of appropriated Rizzo to create their work, and we do admire artists' work. That's what we do. But right now, I think there are only 2 studios in the Philippines, 2 Rizzo studios in the whole country that caters to artists. So that's really why it's expensive for them in particular. Artists can't go to these normal print shops to reproduce their work because it's very specific, and these print shops usually don't have like the range of colors available in, you know, artist-oriented studios.
I would also say that like other countries, there's like a duopoly in the Philippines for Rizzo. So like maybe black is really cheap, but like if you want anything else, it's very expensive. And so these 2 like companies are the ones who are only the official suppliers, and like Filipinos will have to go like even abroad to Korea or like China or something like that to really like buy these inks. So that's also some of the limitations there.
Yes, what's your name? Oh, behind, sorry.
I'm sorry. Thank you for that presentation. That was great. I'm sorry if I missed this, but where physically are the archives, and do you make it accessible for research or to other people to come and see it?
Yes, so actually from the start of the lecture, it's actually a zine. You can actually get it.
We were passing around the zine earlier.
Yeah,
I don't know who has it.
I know, but we are at, yes, there. We have a zine there. We are at K11, up in 905 South Raymond. So like you just
building.
in the other building, we're at K11, where you can purchase it. It's $25, but also the actual pictures and stuff like that, and the essay is also available online. The essay is both in Tagalog and English. So if you prefer Tagalog, there's also a version for that, just so we want to make it accessible.
It's on Substack.
Yes.
Essay.
I'll be brave. I wanted to ask if there are like ways that in the U.S. we can also like see and read more about the like on the ground journalism, I was recently trying to like look for R.J. Ledesma's work, the
Yeah.
journalist who was massacred in Negros, I don't know, last week or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like scouring Facebook, and his name popped up a bunch, and I saw like he was a part of different collectives, but I was like, oh no, I can't actually find much of the stuff that he wrote, and I know he like spoke to like a lot of peasants and like collected and interviewed them very often.
Yeah, I think actually, great question, because he was like he was the ex-boyfriend of my friend. I think he was really active in the print community in the Philippines. I'm sure like some of you were part of Metro Manila. I think the zine community is really close. His work is actually going to be available through Sachet Archives. That's one of the projects that I talked about. They have a project or an exhibition with his work. I do know he was also, I think, with Concerned Artists of the Philippines. You can also find some other couple of activists and their work there. The Philippine Labor Movement Archive is also an amazing place to also find some other activists, unfortunately, who have been killed, some journalists who also have been killed in their work. I know that it's extremely like hard to find these things sometimes, especially in a time where things get deleted easily, things get lost in the internet. I know that they say the internet is forever, but sometimes it's really not. So those are some of the couple of things that I would check first when it comes to R.J. Ledesma. But I do know that there's also a Philippine independent journalism organization. Some of the journalists there, like Regine Cabato, who we used to actually work with in Ateneo. We also have some former journalist friends too, like Rambo Talambong and stuff like that, who also covered like Duterte's regime too.
We have time for one more question. Anyone? Yes.
Hi, thank you again for the presentation. My question is a bit more related to like transnationalism, and I know that you guys mentioned, you know, you went to school at one of the big fours, like at Ateneo, and then you guys continue to do work in New York. I'm curious about like what motivated you guys to move on and like carry your work here, if you have interest in also like carrying your work in the Philippines, like physically, like as well, especially because, you know, like the anti-intellectualism like culture in Philippines versus like the resources and technology accessibility like in the States. Either one of you or all of you, but yeah, what kind of motivated you guys to do that here?
Well, accessibility is still a problem here. For example, in Jersey City, where I'm based at, immigrants do also come from lower middle class to middle class communities in the Philippines, and some of them don't speak English, most of them. And we use Triso to also like spread awareness and communicate with each other. Like for organizations like Migrante, we have to like release statements through it, and some of them are in Filipino.
Yeah, I think also like it's really interesting too. I feel a lot of like anti-intellectualism and stuff like that. I sometimes like get like really confused. Sometimes I feel like actually the academic rigor of the Philippines like is really intense actually in like UP and stuff like that, Big Four. But especially with like art critique and theory, and like I know a lot of also farmers who have read like Marxism and stuff like that, which is really interesting, and you can learn from them too. So it's interesting. It's also sometimes like translation, as Micah said. I think also it's being in New York also as an immigrant. Like for example, for me, before I was a citizen, I'm like an overseas Filipino worker. And why I want to keep being connected to the Philippines is because they basically grew me up, the zine community. And honestly, why we did this whole zine is actually like a tribute. It's like a love letter to what they did, what they have done, especially. So that's mostly what I think too. I think a lot of people are actually really interested in stuff. It's just really about having to be able to communicate it. And to be honest, like, there are some people too who are like highly educated, but they technically highly educated and may come from like Ivy League schools and stuff like that, who don't want to hear about community archives or sometimes other theories and stuff like that because of their beliefs and lack of openness. So I think it's also like different stuff, systematic things, and also all of that.
I also want to add that, as Philippines as a former colony of the U.S., the U.S. still has like so much, influence on our issues, and they are probably like, plaguing some of the major things that we're going through right now. It was really frustrating to see how, even here, it's like people are not aware of what's going on, especially like with like the blatant military presence in the Philippines, their connection with our current president. Sorry. So I think it like I went to not Ateneo like these two. I went to University of the Philippines, and that university was known for activism, especially. And moving to New York really like helped me open my eyes on like what activism could be and what the scene in the States is lacking as well. So I really think that it's important to, bring these issues to light, even though it does not concern Americans specifically. Like the actions of the president here and the government here directly, affect us back home, and it's like really important for Filipino Americans and even non-Filipino Americans to know like what they are indirectly contributing to. So yeah.
I hope that answers your question. Yeah, thank you so much. So I think this is the end of the presentation. Where I really appreciate that you guys are here. We're at table K11. If you want to get the zine and stuff like that. And also, if you have the zine, you can bring it here to the table, just so like we have that copy. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Again, we are Anna Marcelo, Rice Gallardo, and Micah Rimando.
Woohoo!
Thank you so much for coming to our talk.